The vast archives of the shadows contains countless tales and reports of strange events that pierce the veil between our world and the hidden realms of the supernatural. The account you're about to delve into is not of my own experiences, but a first-hand testimony of another who walked among the unknown. May this narrative offer you a glimpse into the enigmatic and often unseen forces that coexist with us, and perhaps grant you a deeper understanding of the intricate tapestry of the mystical world that surrounds us all. Step into the unknown. Archive name: The Forgotten App. There was something about finding forgotten relics of the past that always intrigued me. Be it old books in the attic, forgotten lullabies from childhood, or in this case, an old camera app that once dominated the App Store but had been lost in the vast sea of technology. I had been looking up ways to clean out storage on my phone when I stumbled upon a forum discussing old apps that people missed. Among them was one peculiar camera app called PastFrame. It was touted to have an impeccable user rating but had mysteriously disappeared, probably faded away with the surge of new apps. Curiosity piqued. I decided to give it a go. After all, it was always fun to toy with retro apps and their sometimes clunky interfaces. It took a bit of hunting on the web, but I finally found a working version of the app and downloaded it onto my phone. The app icon was simple: an old-school camera with a clock intertwined. Opening it, the app's interface was indeed outdated, with pixelated buttons and grainy filters reminiscent of the late 2000s. But there was one feature that caught my eye immediately: Capture the Past. No one had mentioned this feature on the forum, and it had a little icon next to it saying new, so I guess it was in the app's last update before it disappeared. It sounded gimmicky, like one of those sepia or black and white filters meant to make your photos look vintage. Still, with a shrug, I decided to give it a shot. I aimed my phone at the empty coffee cup on my table and snapped a picture. The processing took longer than most modern apps, but when the image finally loaded, I gasped. It wasn't my empty coffee cup, but a full one, steam rising, with my grandmother's hand wrapped around it. It was the same mug, the same table, but this was from years ago. I remembered that day. It was the last time she visited me before she passed away. Tears filled my eyes. It felt like magic, or perhaps a window to a memory I held dear. Thinking it was some fluke, maybe some sort of cloud AI stuff, I decided to try it outside, somewhere random. Standing on my balcony, I aimed the app at the park across the street and took another picture. This time, I saw children playing on swings and slides, mothers chatting, and an ice cream vendor nearby, a scene quite contrasting to the empty, silent park in front of me that evening. However, the strangest thing was that I recognized some of those children, now adults, in the present day. The app was fascinating. Every picture I took showed scenes from years, sometimes even decades ago. It was like peeking through a magical lens into history, but not always a pleasant one. The streets I once found cheerful during my nighttime strolls now showed images of accidents or arguments when I snapped pictures with PastFrame. With a mix of trepidation and excitement, I decided to visit my childhood home the next day. The old two-story building had seen better days, with paint peeling off its wooden panels and the garden overrun with weeds. Holding my breath, I aimed the camera at the house and took a photo. The image loaded, showing the house in its former glory, the garden well kept with flowers in full bloom. But what shocked me wasn't the house or the garden. It was the little girl in the foreground, unmistakably a young me, holding hands and chatting animatedly with a tall, shadowy figure. The figure was featureless, just a dark silhouette against the vibrant backdrop of the house. My heart raced. Memories, long buried, began flooding back. As a child, I had an imaginary friend, a tall, shadowy figure I named Mr. Shade. My parents had dismissed Mr. Shade as a result of my overactive imagination, especially after I stopped mentioning him around the age of 7. But here he was, clear as day, standing right beside a young me. For days, I wrestled with the image. It had nestled itself deep within my mind, and sleep became elusive. My initial wonderment with the app transformed into a burning obsession. I was desperate to unlock the mysteries of my past, to understand who or what Mr. Shade was. My quest started with the attic. Old photo albums, diaries, and childhood drawings were stored there. If there was a clue, any hint at the nature of Mr. Shade, it would be hidden among those memories. Hours turned into days as I leafed through pages of history, both known and forgotten. Most photos were as expected: birthday parties, family gatherings, and holidays. But as I delved deeper into my childhood albums, some anomalies emerged. In photos where I was alone, especially in my room or the garden, there appeared faint traces of a shadowy figure. In broad daylight, where no shadow should have been, it was there, always distant but unmistakably present. My old diaries were filled with mentions of Mr. Shade. Played with Mr. Shade today. He told me a story. One entry read. Another said, "Mama got mad when I spoke about Mr. Shade. She doesn't believe he's real." The entries brought back fragmented memories, like jigsaw pieces slowly coming together. Mr. Shade had been a constant companion, always ready with a story or advice. Sometimes, he warned me about dangers, like the time he told me not to climb the old tree in the backyard, and later that day, a huge branch broke off. But he also had moments that made me uncomfortable. I remember him whispering secrets about people, things a child shouldn't know. Like the time he told me about Mrs. Greer's death long before the town knew, or how Mr. Patterson buried something mysterious in his backyard. Overwhelmed by the revelations, I decided to confront my parents. Over a Sunday brunch, I broached the topic. The atmosphere shifted immediately. My mother's fork paused mid-air, and my father's eyes narrowed. After a tense silence, my father finally spoke. "Sarah, we thought you had outgrown that phase. We didn't want to bring it up again." My mother nodded, her face pale. "Honey, Mr. Shade wasn't good for you. You'd become distant, lost in your own world. You stopped playing with other kids and only talked about him." I showed them the photos from the app, the undeniable evidence of Mr. Shade's existence. They exchanged worried glances. "We took you to therapists," my mother whispered, her eyes misting over with tears. "After the death of your sister, things were hard for all of us. We were consumed by grief, and perhaps unintentionally, we may have neglected you a bit during that time." She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "The therapists believed Mr. Shade was a coping mechanism for you, given everything happening around you. When you stopped mentioning him, we thought it was over." "I don't remember visiting any therapists," I protested. "There were multiple," my father replied. "They believed Mr. Shade was a manifestation of loneliness and knowledge beyond your years. Some even hinted at more paranormal explanations, but that's just crazy." But one question lingered. Why can I see him in the app? Why now? They had no answer. I'm not even sure they believed that the pictures were real. Disturbed and yearning for more insights, I started visiting places from my past. The school I attended, the library I frequented, the lake where I spent countless summers. Each photo unearthed memories, some warm, some chilling. Playgrounds showed children long moved away. The library revealed aged librarians now replaced by younger faces. But one consistent presence in all photos was Mr. Shade, always lurking, observing. At the lake, I remembered an incident. My best friend, Emily, and I were on a boat. I wanted to go further into the lake, but Mr. Shade had whispered against it. Of course, Emily didn't hear him, and she accused me of making up stories to get my way. In a fit of anger, I pushed her. She fell into the water, struggling, gasping. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Emily never resurfaced. I had blocked out the memory, convincing myself it was an accident that happened when I wasn't around. But Mr. Shade had tried to prevent it, and I had misinterpreted his warning. The weight of guilt pressed heavily on me. Was Mr. Shade a guardian, trying to guide me but being misunderstood? Or was he something more sinister, pulling strings from the shadows? Desperate for answers and plagued by guilt, I decided to use the app in my old bedroom. Maybe, I thought, it would provide some clarity. I needed to understand the nature of Mr. Shade, his purpose, and his connection to me. I stood in the middle of my childhood room, a sense of foreboding crawling up my spine. Slowly, I raised my phone and aimed the camera around, finally stopping at the foot of my bed. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the shutter button. As the image processed, I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The picture revealed me, no older than 7, peacefully asleep under the covers. The dim glow of the streetlights streamed through the curtains, casting shadows across the room. And there, at the edge of the bed, was Mr. Shade, looming over my resting form, his posture protective, or perhaps possessive. My hands shaking slightly, I took another photo. The room transformed into a child's bedroom with posters of pop stars and an array of stuffed animals. It was unmistakably my room at age 10. But again, the tranquility was disrupted by Mr. Shade. This time, he was even larger, his form more distorted, leaning over the bed, watching over me, like a silent guardian or a persistent specter. Inhaling sharply, I snapped another photo. The decorations matured, the stuffed animals replaced by books and teen magazines. Age 14, Mr. Shade's presence became more menacing. The shadow was now distinctly leaning over, almost as if ready to touch the sleeping teenager on the bed. With my heart pounding loudly in my chest, I took yet another photo. This time, it was my room at age 16, with makeup scattered on the table and a guitar resting against the wall. But Mr. Shade was nearly unrecognizable. The once tall, slender shadow had become grotesquely deformed, looming large over the bed, almost engulfing the sleeping figure beneath. The realization hit me hard. Mr. Shade wasn't merely an imaginary friend or a guardian angel gone astray. He was a manifestation of my suppressed guilt, regrets, and fears. Every dark thought, every painful memory, every unresolved emotion had given life to this entity. Tears welled up in my eyes. Despite the terror, I had to know more. One last photo, I promised myself. As the camera clicked, I held my breath. The image that loaded was unlike any other. It was still my room, but everything else was shadowed, blurred, almost inconsequential. For there, in the center, was Mr. Shade. The most horrifying part was his face. No longer just a shadowy silhouette. It had features, eyes, hollow and endless. A mouth twisted in a sinister grin. And he was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. I dropped my phone in horror, the screen cracking upon impact with the floor. In a frenzied panic, I quickly uninstalled the PastFrame app. It was gone, removed from my device, but the images, the horror, remained etched in my mind. That night, as I tried to find solace in the embrace of sleep, the silence of the room was pierced by soft whispers. "You can't run away, Sarah," the voice hissed, chilling me to the bone. "The past never truly fades. You can't simply delete memories, and you certainly can't delete me." Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of the curtains sent jolts of fear through me. The weight of the past pressed heavily, reminding me that some memories, especially the darkest ones, are indelible. They persist, linger, and sometimes they manifest in ways we can never anticipate. Days turned into restless nights, and nights into fear-filled days. Seeking professional help, I engaged therapists and even spiritual counselors, hoping to rid myself of Mr. Shade. But his whispers remained, a constant reminder that the past clings tightly. While I no longer saw Mr. Shade after deleting the app, his presence was always felt. Every shadow seemed darker, every silence more profound, every memory more vivid. And amidst it all, one truth emerged: our past, especially the parts we try to forget or run away from, has a way of catching up, of reminding us that it is a part of who we are. And so, I learned to live with the whispers, with the weight of my regrets and fears, hoping to find a way to confront them, to reconcile with them, because sometimes the only way out is through. And perhaps, one day, I could face Mr. Shade, not as an entity of terror, but as a manifestation of lessons learned and battles fought.